Hello there. It's great having a lecture. This is terrific. I'll introduce myself. My name is Marc Cieslak. I'm the very first AI correspondent at BBC News. So as you might imagine, I have a particular interest in artificial intelligence and how it's going to affect all of our lives, from employment to healthcare, entertainment to education. It's not enough to say that you're afraid of AI or you don't trust it. In many cases, these technologies have been around for much longer than a lot of people think. And AI is certainly here to stay. So, how can we ensure that artificial intelligence evolves in a safe and equitable way across the Commonwealth? That new opportunities that arise from this tech are available to all? Well, hopefully, that's what we're going to explore with our incredibly esteemed and expert panel that we've gathered here for you today. We have Dr. Nicola Hodson, who's the Chief Executive in the UK and Ireland of IBM. We have Romana Pugh, who is a change lead from the BBC. Suki Fuller, who is an expert in tech and cybersecurity, as well as an intelligence expert and analytical storyteller. And Nicola Oladapardo, who is from the ITU, digital inclusion and a youth leadership and partnerships expert as well. Please. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to start with Dr. Hodson. IBM has been involved in AI as a significant player in the space. So how do you think what do you think the biggest challenges are with reference to the Commonwealth countries, and what are the biggest opportunities?
Look, I think if I start with the challenges, we did a survey recently of business leaders, and while 70-odd% of them think that it's important to have women leading the charge in AI, only 33% of them have women in decision-making positions in AI. So it's really important when we think about the design, the development, and the adoption of AI that we've got the full diversity of our society represented. So that would be the first thing I would say as a challenge. On the flip side, the opportunity is fantastic, and organisations and academics are coming together to make all of the technology open source, to democratise it, to make sure that anyone can take a foundation model and build a business on the back of it. And I think the more that we do together across companies, governments, NGOs, to make that technology available to all, the more we will see startups and women engaging in that technology from the get-go.
Suki, what's your perspective on that? Challenges and opportunities?
Why did you look at me like that? It's almost like you knew. Well, that's on the soft side of technology, but on the hard side, by hard I mean hardware, probably the biggest thing that's really lacking right now is infrastructure. And while we can control how many people are going into the skills, getting the skills, we really need to get the basic infrastructure within countries up to speed before we can actually implement those changes technologically. And that's also a role where we are lacking women. So we need more women in those decision roles that are saying, hey, this is where we need something built. They need to be in those positions of power, allocating resources. And that's probably the biggest opportunity, I think, for technology overall and society overall, is that we need to be in those decision making, pulling the purse strings. We need to be in those positions before we can fully embrace the AI changes and the digital technology advances.
Nicola, how do you think that we address that notion of female leaders and being in decision making positions?
Thank you so much for the question. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Yes, thank you. So I work in ITU. This is the United Nations Agency for Technology, and 2.6 billion people don't have access to the internet. So a third of the population of the world is offline. So when we start, just building on the points that Suki was just making, when we start discussing technological advancements or even looking at career opportunities, upskilling and so on, it's difficult to have those kinds of conversations when we don't even have the basic infrastructure. We don't even have basic connectivity in a third of the world, no access to the internet, and even those who have access, is the connectivity meaningful? How much is data cost to even are people safe when they go online? Are women safe when they go online? So it's beyond just the connectivity, it's a meaningful connectivity, and then we start looking on the leadership side, on basically, and even when we look at the leadership, how can you meaningfully lead something that you didn't really have a place in building? You didn't co-build that thing, and it's something that has been built really without your participation, and then everyone's scrambling to say, okay, now for representation purposes, let's see how we can. So I think the question is very complex, because to be able to meaningfully contribute to something, there should be co-design, and that's why we're now moving away from this pattern of just representation and women leadership and inclusion to actually co-design from the beginning, and then being a part of the implementation, and then even the monitoring, evaluation, and so on in the future. So in summary, true leadership should come from co-designing, and because we're still at the beginning stages of many of the new emerging technologies, we really have opportunity to co-design so that we can have meaningful leadership in the future.
Romana, what's your take on that, meaningful leadership?
Thank you. Yeah, I certainly agree. So at the BBC, I lead on digital accessibility for our products, so making sure they're accessible to everyone. And something that certainly resonates for me with that is thinking about, firstly, a lot of people aren't online, and those that are, only 3% of the internet is actually fully accessible. So if you already think these large language models, these data models are scraping this inaccessible data and then using that as algorithms. So of course it's not going to be surprising that the output is not accessible either. And so I think it's really important that with AI going at the pace it has, and now with everyone having it available to them, we need to think about where's the bias checks, where are we going to check that there isn't going to be bias in the outputs. Another point on the leadership point that I think is really interesting, in this analogy of pulling up a seat to the table. When you say only 30% of those leadership decisions in technology are taken by women, well, that is still just a minority representation on that table. So what we're doing is we're expecting people that have finally broken through the glass ceiling to then use that position to pull against the norm and say and fight against some of the biases and groupthink around that table. One, is that fair? And secondly, it's probably quite unrealistic. So it's really important now that companies are going a bit further than saying, I've got a single female on the exec, tick, I'm sort of done. That's not going to make culture change. We actually need to get this nearer to 50%, so that you're not just pushing against the tide when you get there, that you actually have allies around that table as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned bias checks. This is something I want to ask Suki about first. How can we address the ethical challenges associated with artificial intelligence, such as bias, facial recognition, while still promoting its benefits for women in the Commonwealth?
That's a whole conference.
26 words or less, please.
The first thing is that I don't think it can actually happen right now. There's a balance that needs to happen, and it comes down to education. And it needs to happen at a younger age, that we are educating. We have, the professor talking about societal differences. That is something, it's sort of like programming. We have to program it out. And that's basically kind of impossible. However, if we can teach young children to remain in that mindset that they have, they don't have the structural differences. They do not have that when they are 5, 6 years old. That's when it starts to develop. And we need to make sure that they keep that mindset of equality and inclusion and not have it programmed out. And I see that's the only way it'll happen, unless we're going to, sit around for a couple thousand more years and, have our patriarchal and matriarchal. But that's one of those questions. That is a question for discussion every day when you talk about technology. It's a question for discussion when you talk about every aspect of society, because as humans, and especially as adults, we do have our biases, and they are becoming more apparent as you get older in age. And once you're an adult, it is very clearly there. I mean, I'm probably more biased towards being pro-woman, so, but it's there, and I don't know. That's an impossible question.
But around the conversation around artificial intelligence, there's a lot of talk about the godfathers of artificial intelligence all the time. We constantly hear about the godfathers of artificial intelligence. It seems that AI has more godfathers than the Corleone family. And as a result of that, do we need to then start thinking differently about how women involve themselves and how women are represented as leaders in AI?
I think the unfortunate aspect of society is that the people that have gotten AI to this point have been majority men. There are women that are involved in that process, but they're not having sort of a public-facing role. And they are often diminished when they do have those roles. We all see it. When something goes wrong in a company, a woman is jettisoned in as the next CEO, and it's like, oh, she's going to fix it, when in fact she's not. She's just there to plug a hole, and when it does go right, women are removed from those positions. So the godfathers, I'm a little I'm not particularly happy, because when things, especially around bias and ethics, were clearly called out by women in the industry, they were removed and silenced. And the godfathers of AI didn't really say much until it became globally and very publicly apparent that there was something wrong, and that we were having more bias, more ethical issues, more hallucinations. And that's when they started to speak up. So I don't really give them much credence. They're godfathers, just like the Corleones, because they are quite gangster. There are more women that are needed to be able to have those voices, and that only comes with women being able to be larger, have those big companies. Unfortunately, we don't get to have them because nobody wants to find. That's a whole nother issue about financing women that are starting these companies. And we do have a little bit of a stronghold with the people that have the power right now. So it's how do we unseat the godfathers?
Quite gangster is definitely my takeaway for the day. Nicola, what's your take on that? What's your take on the addressing the ethics and biases inherent in a lot of the design of AI?
Look, I think when it relates to ethics and bias, you need, first and foremost, you need some decent regulation, and the world is working on that, and the UK is taking a lead. I think you get that decent regulation in place, then you could start to look at how technology can actually help you with bias and fairness, and regulating the AI models from the get-go so that they are fair. That's a lot about how you train them and the data you use, which we touched on earlier, and making sure you've got diversity in the design and in the design of the ethics models. Most companies have now an ethics board, at least the large ones, and they're deciding every day, everyone, so IBM has an ethics board. Every single person on the ethics board has the right of veto on any project the company's doing. Only takes one person to say no, and we don't go ahead. So there are some things you can sort of embed into your systems. There's technology that you can use. As it relates to the godfathers and what you can do to help there, I think women need women to look up to. I was very, very influenced by a strong female leader early in my career, and I think the more we can start to profile the women at the top on AI, we only found out decades afterwards about the women who helped with the moon landing, the early computers, etc. So if we can do that as we go, and some of that's, I know there are lots of media friends in the room, the more we can do there to profile women and give others someone to look up to and think, maybe I could do that, then I think you create more possibilities for younger people.
No longer hidden figures. Suki, what do you think with regard to the development of? Sorry, I'm going to ask this to Nicola. What do you think with regard to the development of artificial intelligence and ethics? How can we ensure that we still get benefit from it, and that these technologies are developed in an ethical way?
Yeah,
I think most of the answers have basically been said, and as the ITU, with the oldest UN organization, one of the least known, the member states are meeting up regularly in council in several meetings and creating these regulations, creating the structures. Some may argue that we're a little bit late to the party, but now trying to really take the helm, working with academia as well to try to make sure AI policies are as sort of resilient as possible as we continue to advance technologically and without leaving people behind and bridging the digital divide. But I really want to build on the bit of hope of why I think the future is going to be better, and I think Suki touched on it as well, and as well as the amazing interview we had just before young people. So basically, as Baroness Scotland was sharing earlier, there are 2.7 billion people in the Commonwealth, 60% of whom are under 30, of which I am one, and the fact that young people at the moment are having a different perspective as digital natives that grew up with technology. They have a different perspective to those that basically don't have the same lived experience and at the moment are in decision-making power. So eventually, and we're starting to see with the project that I lead at the moment at work is a youth project, and we're working with young entrepreneurs looking at their safety online, and we're trying to co-consult with young people across the world on their digital future and co-creating a digital future for all. Through that work, I see every day, and through with academia as well and member states, the true appetite, especially with young people at the helm. I feel and I can see that if they are giving more opportunities to lead, more opportunities to make their voices heard and co-create this digital future, that ethics for AI, generative AI or otherwise, or even other emerging technology will create a more equal world, because young people are so concerned with leveraging the power of technology to solve the SDGs. And even the for-profit ventures and so on that we see from young entrepreneurs, they always have a social aspect. They always have an aspect around humanity or the planet or a cause. And this is very different to the sort of business models that we saw in previous decades. So the hope for more equal policies or more ethical policies regarding technology, I think for me, is in the young people, and which is why we cannot continue to leave them behind in the Commonwealth and in the wider sort of global agenda.
I suppose one way of attempting to address issues of equity in AI is the Commonwealth AI Consortium, which I'd like to ask you about. It was established in 2023, it focuses on leveraging AI for sustainable development across its member states, and aims to empower over 1.5 billion young people who are under 30, as you mentioned. Now, how can the AI Consortium be leveraged, do you think, to close the gender gap in AI leadership and skills across those member states? That's to you, Jonathan.
Okay, I'm not working on this, but basically how AI can be leveraged for this is just, as I said, is basically co-creating with young people who are using this technology every day and who are digital natives and who have a new perspective than the decision makers and lawmakers than we had before. But just because I haven't heard your voice yet, I would like to hear on this question.
So what I know of the consortium, they're promoting AI skills in places where it's not accessible at the moment, and that's key. If you're not encouraging people to learn these skills, they're never going to enter that market. So I think that's really important as part of the consortium work.
What do you think it could do? What do you think could be the sort of concrete outcomes from that? It's interesting, we say leverage, but what does that actually mean? What can be done to empower people across the Commonwealth?
I think what we need to understand is the root cause of the drop-off in retention.
Yeah.
If you start looking at number of people that are interested in science and maths and engineering at school, it's actually still quite balanced. And then you find at university it drops off, and then you find that retention rates at university drop off, and then when they get into the job market it then drops off within a year. Lots of females leave. So at every stage something is happening. I'm not sure what that is, whether that's because of interest or because of it's quite an isolating subject. It can be, if you're doing something like software engineering and you're coding, there isn't really a community around that. But I think there's something that happens right from the toys we give our children when they're 5 or 6 and what we expect them to be interested in, to how that's encouraged throughout. So I think that's really important. The other thing I think is thinking about who's in the decision-making committees at the end. And the problem is that is quite senior positions usually. So you tend not to have diversity there. But if you do have diversity at that level, I bet you anything a female will notice if every time you ask an AI algorithm for a scientist, it comes up with a white male. They will spot that. A disabled person will spot if there's a harmful stereotype of a disabled person in a picture. And that's why it's so important to have diversity at the decision making, and not just the people that are sort of doing the coding or doing the design at the beginning, but actually in the decision making seat. That's where you have to have people spotting the risks and saying, no, this isn't okay.
Nicola, what do you think?
Can I just come in on two topics?
Yeah.
One is what countries can potentially do, but just to sort of build on this topic, we did even in the tech industry, right? You see a drop off in middle management particularly. So we did a report recently. We saw the pipeline for women in AI is really tailing off. I think you need really good structured programs. So we just launched one ourselves called Women Plus AI, and it's to take away the fear that that's not for me, or I don't know my place in that. And it's a community, it's a set of education. There is so much free education on AI out there that I think if we kind of come together to collaborate and make all of that accessible, then I think you've got some more structure to solve the problem of which Romana was rightly saying, the drop-offs at different career stages. Just to come back to the sort of higher level in terms of what countries can do, we see already like about 20-25% differential in terms of the adoption rates for AI across different countries, and Singapore, China, the UAE, they're well ahead of the rest, even the UK. And so when I think about that, you need to have clarity about what you want to be good at as a country. You need to have programs in place to help you build those skills. More importantly, you need to build an ecosystem from the get-go of companies that are going to be with you, you know, through all sizes, scale-up, startups, etc. And you need to build a skills base. And I think without those systemic things in place, it's really, really hard to catch up. If you don't have all of the skills, 2 million tech jobs were not filled in the UK last year, just to give you a size of the problem. That's in the UK. Now, if you don't have those skills coming through the pipeline, you don't drive the adoption of that technology, and you don't get the economic benefits, you don't get the job opportunities being filled, and you won't get as many women coming through the pipeline. So I think you've got to look at systemically at the country level, and then for individuals, how do you massively ramp the skills and make it something more structured and less of a fear-driven motivation and more of an opportunity-driven one.
Suki, what sort of concrete steps do you think can be taken to challenge that drop-off?
I'm going to come back to my point of infrastructure, because it's great that we want to have the education aspect, we want to have all of that structure, but if we don't even have the energy sources, we can't do it. So that's fundamental. And across, if you're looking at the Commonwealth, there is a disparity with where you have energy sources, how are you getting energy, the cost of energy before you even get to the point where you can actually unleash the technological power. That's, for me, that's always the basic fundamental, is can we actually build it? You know, if you build it, they will come. And right now we need to build it in order to actually be at the same level as those countries that Nicola mentioned. You know, China, in particular China, they build a lot faster.
But who does that? Who is going to do that? Who is going to provide that investment to build it?
Unfortunately, those companies that have the godfathers, they're the ones that have the most money. And unfortunately, I think right now you're seeing just the disparity of wealth. The countries that are the most wealthy, they already have those things in place. They already have the power source, the infrastructure. They're able to drive within their countries. It's a matter of, do they want to share? And I think people are not understanding that the greater good for everybody is the greater good for the whole planet. You can't always be so hyper-focused on your country and think that's going to be the best way for change. Because as we see, that's, as we said, that's what drives conflicts, that's what drives wars, is a disparity. So we need to really, I don't know, there needs to just be more women in charge, because I think there'd be much more negotiation, more peace. So get those women in offices, people. And I'm not exactly sure. I mean, this is the fundamental discussion that I'm having with people in technology right now, is how do we do that? How do we get that infrastructure to change? It starts out small, it's incremental. You get people in place that are working in architecture, that are working in systems engineering in order to build those buildings, that understand the disparity of where you're building, the north-south divide in England. You know, just some places we have in England don't even have 5G or 4G. And we're talking about the Commonwealth. There are some places they don't have access to it at all, as you were saying. And so I'm not sure. There's part of it which is, somebody was talking about male allies. Sometimes it's finding those allies in those companies that hold the power, and for women to be the conciliators to those godfathers and saying, hey, you know, why don't you think about this? That's how we've always gone about getting change, is really having those women that are in the room that can actually persuade and influence the men that are in those rooms that have those positions of power. But now we're at the point where instead of influencing, we need to actually take the reins. So, yeah, you know, being a little bit more invincible.
Do you think these technologies have the ability to not just make us think differently about sort of gender disparity in the workplace, but think differently about work?
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. But you know what? Most people have been working remotely before this became the hype topic. And in fact, if you're a woman, you know, going back to period products, I have to just mention this because I always tell women that are looking for investment, they go into pitch and they think, oh, well, women don't know how to manage money. Women, and I've said this many times, women, we've been managing money, our own finances, from the age that we've had to buy menstrual products for ourselves. You know, the average teenager boy is spending their extra money on whatever. A teenage girl, and especially when you go to college and university, you're thinking, okay, I'm broke. I'm not going to go out and spend my money on beer or cigarettes or something else. I'm thinking, I have to save money to make sure I have my menstrual products. I have to save money to make sure that I have birth control. Because although boys think about birth control, it's not the primary for them. For women it is. So that's one of those disparities. It's the wealth disparity that we need to get under control for women in order for us to make those changes, being in those positions of power, being able to influence and really push and use male allies to make those changes in the infrastructure. I cannot stress to you, infrastructure and education really are two of the fundamental changes that need to occur for us to really, really unleash technology.
So a possibility then for societal change as well as change in the workplace?
Definitely.
I love that. I love it. Yeah, definitely.
Of course. I think everybody in this room knows that. And that's the one thing. We are all very much on the same page in this room. We need to find the people that don't even know this book exists. We need to find the people that are just not aware. They don't want to be aware, and they're in those positions of power. They don't want to lose power. And that's really what it is. Power structures. It's the people that want to keep their power. And I know Nicola was like, uh-huh.
Nicola, what do you think?
About power structures.
Yeah.
I think, look, I'll come back to one of the points made earlier. It is very difficult to change a power structure on your own. I was on a board, and every year they would organise a board meetings in the February half term and the October half term. I had 3 young kids, and I'm sort of doing a board meeting while I'm trying to ski behind a 4-year-old on a ski slope, and you know, just silly things. I asked and asked and asked for the dates to change. It was only when another woman with a family joined the board that there were 2 of us that they couldn't ignore the problem anymore. And so I think the importance of allies, be them male or female, it's really important that you've got enough sway to really change a decision and influence in practice. So, you know, that would be my point. I can't argue with you on infrastructure. It goes without saying. I feel almost silly talking about AI when you don't have basic energy and infrastructure in place. But you know, it is important that people can access that stuff. You don't always need the infrastructure in country necessarily. If you can access the internet, then you can build a business. You don't necessarily need to have the infrastructure on your doorstep. So those would be the points I would make. But you definitely need more than one to change a power structure.
Romana, I'm interested if you think that this sort of technology, the AI in particular, can be transformative in the workplace and help to sort of close the gender disparity gap.
I think it's a really interesting fear with AI is that, you know, for me, I think the bias and ethics question's becoming more of a hot topic now, but actually traditionally it's been about job loss. That's been the fear.
Yeah.
Whereas actually if you look at the research, it suggests that it's not that jobs will be lost, but they will change. And so I think it's about understanding the jobs it's likely to impact, which they think are going to be clerical jobs, secretarial jobs, jobs traditionally held by a lot of women. So actually if we can get ahead of the curve to say this is where it's going to change, and AI is not going to replace jobs, but it's going to change what you do in your job. So even at the BBC where we're using AI, it's not replacing jobs, it's now looking at how do we then use that bit of the workflow that's got faster to do something different and innovate differently. So I think it's about thinking about what are the opportunities going to be with how my job's going to change, rather than seeing it as replacing different types of jobs.
Do you think that AI could have a transformative effect on how we think about work?
No, absolutely, it already is, because with sort of new, as was just said, with new kind of roles and the jobs of the future that most of which don't even exist now, and different things like this, it also brings opportunities for new models of work, you know, flexible working and different things that will only be hopefully increasing well-being for everyone. But a point I just want to kind of go back to a little bit, because I was hearing a lot about sort of disparities and so on, and it is really important to, because I in meetings like this, you know, we say Commonwealth, but as was said earlier, the wealth is not common in the Commonwealth, and the context is so idiosyncratic for every single community, even within a country, talk less of a whole sort of consortium of countries. So for example, as I was saying about youth, you know, in Europe, 98% of youth have access to the internet, and across the African continent, it's I think 55% of youth that have access to the internet. So and 21 countries of the Commonwealth are in the continent of Africa. So when we're looking at the different experiences of women and girls or young people in the different contexts, it will vary so widely. So even if, for example, there's a gap in maybe the UK for jobs in cybersecurity and so on, perhaps the jobs in, you know, sub-Saharan Africa and the Pacific, even though it may be tech related, may not necessarily require the exact same skills or the same skill set or the same training, and you know, and then the cultures in those different places differ so much. So I do think the thing that I would add to all the amazing points is just to veer away from the one size fits all approach when we're looking at the experiences of women and girls and young people, and you know, everyone, because the goal is that the wealth becomes obviously more common, and everyone has a more productive and equal shared digital future. But for that to happen, the idiosyncratic context of different communities need to be considered, even in the co-creation of new technologies, in the adaptation, in the monitoring and evaluation as well.
Well, we look at how some of these technologies have evolved in the last couple of years. Large language models, it's only in recent times that they've started to adopt different languages other than English.
Yes, but then, you know, the technology, it generates the knowledge that's in there, but who's inputting that information? It's those that have the access. The 2.6 billion people that don't have access to the internet, whatever their thoughts are, ideas are, that's not gonna be generated when you type into your chat GPT. So, as much as we want to celebrate these advancements, we have to, the 2/3 of us that have access to the internet, what are we doing with our privilege? It's the same way we're saying the godfathers that are there, what are they doing with their privilege? Why there's so many women that don't have the access? So the 2.3 billion of us that are, the 2/3 of the world that have access to the internet, we are privileged. What are we doing to pull up the 1/3 that don't have access? So I think it starts there. Is what are those who have, even if it may seem marginal, some level of privilege, what are we doing to pull up or to try to support or to even raise awareness for those that may not be in the same position? So with AI, and now I'm glad we're having conversations like this, and it is happening on a wider scale. You know, we have meetings a lot. We just recently had AI for Good. We happen to every year in Geneva, where we bring these godfathers as well as member states and different people to have this kind of discussions. Of course, it's not everything, but we're trying to take these steps. That's the goal, to try to pull up those that have been left behind.
How do we address that? That's the thing. It's like, how do we address that? Because these are fundamental issues in the development of these technologies that are already changing our lives across the planet. That's a big.
Yeah, I'll share the floor, but just in summary, I will say education, continued dialogue, because the policy has to come from international level, national level, coming down to regional levels, national, local levels. But education and dialogue.
Romana?
I think it's investment. The problem is everybody wants the pot of money, and it's always going to be difficult. But if countries aren't investing now, they're going to be even further behind. The digital divide is already, very rapidly increasing. So I think it's about somebody deciding that this is important and this is an opportunity area.
Suki?
Investment, education, infrastructure.
And Nicola?
I would just add one to investment, to education and infrastructure, and that is, I think countries can develop their own language models, and that can bring forth their culture, some of their heritage and history. I see some smaller countries already doing that, and I think that's a way of starting to bring some of that different thinking into the language models.
How can large organisations like IBM and emerging tech initiatives, how can they help address some of these issues?
There are a bunch of ways, and all of it's small on the scheme of the challenges we're hearing about, but organisations like ours can and do make free training available. So we have, as an example, something called Skills Build. We aim to train 30 million people globally by 2030, and we're aiming to train 2 million people in AI by the end of next year. That's all free. It's on the internet. If you can access it, then it's there for you. Often companies like ours work in partnership with NGOs and governments to scale that, to scale it through universities, and to just find a wider accessible pool. And then to the points made earlier around AI for Good and some of the global initiatives, I think big organisations play their part there. The other thing I would say is large companies typically have very structured programs for diverse groups within them. I mentioned one around Women plus AI, but we have lots and lots of programs like that. We share them with other companies. So we do something called Lift with Vodafone and Sky, which is a women's event once a year. If people want to pool resources and do stuff with the bigger companies, then most will make themselves available. I've worked at a couple of others as well, and I know that they do the same. So I think it's more about how do you pull things together and get some economies of scale and some greater lift for everyone, rather than doing it one company at a time.
My final question to all of you is, how would you like to see artificial intelligence change women's lives across the Commonwealth in the next decade? Starting with Romana.
Get less time to think. I think if we always start with the policy that it has to be AI for good, not just AI for growth. That for me, I think will lead us down the right path. If we don't start with that principle though, it will be easy, I think, to be taken in by the fact that things get faster, we can make money faster. So I think it's just remembering that it has to be AI for good, not just AI by itself.
Nicola?
Yes, AI for good is definitely one of the pillars of IT's work, so I completely agree. But just plainly, I would really like for AI to make the lives of women in the Commonwealth easier. I like it to make it to make our lives easier, and also to be a vehicle to be able to achieve our full potential.
Nicola?
I think all of us in this room have been smashing down barriers for all of our careers, and I think if we continue doing that, we make it that much easier for the ones who follow, and every single one is important.
And Suki?
I'm going to be somewhat controversial here.
Go for it.
And that is, while we have that utopic vision of having AI for good, we have to acknowledge the fact that all technology has dual use, and there are people that develop their technology for the other side, the AI for bad. And so when we are developing our AI for good, we need to really make sure that what we're developing, we know and we are really adhering to understanding how that can also be used in a negative way. And I think that a lot of people have developed technology and they've been gung-ho about, yes, it's so great, but they've not been really focused on how it can be bad. And unfortunately, that comes with not having a diverse and inclusive functioning team when you start out to develop something, so you have different points of view and perspectives to question exactly what you're doing. So, sorry, I just had to raise that point. I mean, because we, as women, we always want to collaborate to make things better. And we are not generally the ones going, oh, let's just make a lot of money, or, you know, we can destroy a country because they've annoyed us. You know, we're not the ones that are doing that. So, you know, we have to really remember that, especially as women. No offense to the men in the room, but we really have to remember that when we are working together and also working with others in order to make it better. And as for the Male Allies thing, there is a new organization called Male Allies UK, run by Lee Chambers, who Lalita also knows, and Jade Anderson, and they just launched. And please, if you are males, get your friends, join that, and really help and push forward and support the women that are out here.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like you all to please thank our incredible panel. Very superb. I can see Lalita here, who is going to make me give up the lectern, and I've become very, very attached to this lectern, but I have to give it back to you now.
I don't want you to go. You can get a mic as well, because I want to ask you a question as well.
Oh, goodness me. Okie dokie. I'll grab a microphone back.
Just want to say thank you so much. That was such a powerful panel, and the time has just gone like that. So I've got a couple of very powerful people in the room that I'd also like to bring in on this conversation, and that's Laura Ellis, who is Head of Technology Forecasting for the BBC, and also Petra Abam, who heads up, she leads on Responsible AI. So I'd just like you both to come, and also Marc, you've been listening to these amazing women talk about AI. What's your reflection, and what should we be going away with or think about? What's your takeaway?
My takeaway, I'm in awe of our panel. They're absolutely superb. I think the biggest takeaway that I have from this is you know, the gangster takeaway. The notion that the conversation is framed almost entirely around men, and in a not so subtle way framed almost entirely around men, does an enormous disservice to the people that work in this field who aren't men, of which there are a great number, a very, very massive number. And I think that's something that I'll take away from this, and I have taken away from my experience with a lot of different companies around the world who I've had the opportunity to visit. I've been lucky enough to see them and see their work, and see that it is not just the work of a small cabal of consiglieres and wannabe Corleones.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Consigliere is now my new favourite word. It's lovely to be on a platform with you again. What an amazing morning. Thank you so much. And I know I'm standing between you and your lunch, so I'm going to be very, very quick. But just to say, I'm on a wonderful table over there. And one of the conversations we've been having is something that I feel very strongly about, which is that when you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so many of them depend on access to trustworthy information. And AI is a real threat to that. And much as I love it, and we love everything that it can do and all the growth that it can bring, and all the responsibility we need to have alongside that, I wonder whether we're spending enough time on protecting our information ecosystem, which AI is going to pollute endlessly with lots of generated content, which we're starting to call slop. And I'd love to kind of pick up that conversation. If anyone is interested, the BBC has a wonderful project that it's involved with called C2PA, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. I'm a bit of a saleswoman on it. So if you're interested in that and you're interested in how we can protect our information as we put it out into the very vulnerable, place that it is in, please come talk to me about that. But I have so many reflections on this morning. I've already started reading the book, which is fantastic. Thank you. And I'd just like to say huge thanks to Lita and everyone else who's made this possible, and Rupa, because these are the sort of conversations we need to have, and I'm really delighted to hand over to my wonderful colleague who is in the responsible AI space in the BBC.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Lita. Sorry, as I knock myself out here. Thanks. I've also been. I think it's been. Sorry, I'm just standing completely in the gap. Basically, just trying to beat me up. It's telling me to get off the stage quickly. I think some of these conversations have been inspiring and really interesting. And I work in responsible AI at the BBC, which is basically about making sure that our use of AI is in line with our values. And that's really important as a public service organisation. I think a lot of this is about, as has already been said, I think it's also about, when we're thinking about AI, as you said, it's about AI for good, but also it's also about what is the purpose of AI? It's not just is it for good, it's like what is it we're trying to achieve? I went to a conference early this year and somebody said, fear of missing out is not a strategy. And I think that is stuck with me because it's so important. I think a lot of companies, people are they want to play in the space, but what purpose? We sometimes say in our sort of area that sometimes the best use of AI is no use of AI, and that's something just to really consider. And I think again that whole point about the fact that a third of the world aren't even online. Data is so important when we talk about bias and all of these kind of things. All the AI is only as good as the data that we put into it. And if you think about it, data is based on human history. And let's think about who we are as human history. We have gone to war, we're biased, we're discriminatory, we do all these things, but we're asking machines, we're asking AI to hold to these standards that we don't even have as humans. So sometimes we have to consider what is it we actually expect and what's actually reasonable. So I just think it's a great conversation.